Welcome to the final two stages of the fourth season of the Dirt Racing series. You're going to be joining us for a double header today, starting on the Champs-Élysées with the Platinum Plus division, and then finishing it off with the Platinum 1.5 division on the Zwift Gran Fondo ITT, which will be finishing at the top of the volcano. Just quickly get you up to date with where the teams are for the Platinum Plus division. So leading the way we have Beast Mode, who have been absolutely dominating the series. Fantastic performances from them in every single stage. They've got a tight battle for the second place on the podium between Coalition and ESRT The Unknown. Both very strong teams. It's going to be very tight going into that. We've got two stages here today, starting at 20 points and 1 point per position. So it's all to play for. And remember, if there is a tie at the end of the standings, it comes down to total rider points scored. And as you can see, Coalition is slightly ahead on that. There's going to be more points available on the first stage with an extra segment, and there will be on the individual time trial. So potentially, if one team wins one the other, if you're going to win one of them, then the first one, this points race on the Champs-Élysées, is going to be the race to go for. You have down in 4th place then, down Dirty Ospreys, not too much fight for. They could move either way, but are probably going to be sealing out that 4th place. Then it gets a bit tighter after that with Coned, who've in a fantastic shift. Mainly B riders or recently upgraded B riders, leading the way from TZH, Spanish team, who saw a good performance last week. Then Burrito Titans, CMC Rhinos, both who would be looking to move up and overtake the other with plenty of places, possibly moving all the way up to 5th if Cone don't perform too well today. You can see the rest of the teams coming down the standings. Quickly introduce the course chief, probably seen this a few times, doing a lap and a half of Paris essentially, coming around once into the normal start-finish banner. Then we're coming up the long uphill drag where we'll have the Lutece Sprint with its FTS segment this lap and on the second lap. Then coming back around that start-finish banner, we'll have first cross the line points. And then that, as we come all the way back round, we'll have the Lutece Sprint again, and then finishing right at the top of the circle around the Arc de Triomphe. So we're going to jump onto the live stream now as we're ready to get going. As you come out, you'll see a couple of the riders facing the wrong way. Another classic Zwiftism. It happens quite regularly on this course, but all it does is send you a little bit further back. So you do have to kick out quite hard at the start, but it's more visual glitch, and you can see some of those riders really sending it through the group as Zwift just brings them back up. It's almost like when you see on hairpins, especially on Crit City, sometimes you'll find on those hairpins that certain riders will get pushed further forward and further backwards without changing their speed versus the pack, and then in that final straight they'll be kind of adjusted by Zwift back to where they actually are on the server side. And that's just the difference between the server side and the kind of player side, where your local machine will kind of show you a visual on the track that makes sense, whereas on the server you might be directly on top of another rider, and Zwift doesn't really on their server account for kind of bunch positioning as far as I'm aware. That's all done on the player side. So you're all just either a certain distance behind, all in a perfectly straight line with riders overlapping. And so if you move back visually because of a bend, the server then moves you back up slowly. See a couple of riders just drifting towards the back. See Nordy for Race Beast Mode. I don't think that'll be a permanent little far back. And so Tommy Vale for CMC. Not quite sure what happened to the two of them there as he did the downhill for a little rise up here. It's quite an interesting part. Sometimes you see some long attacks from here. It's just far enough away and not for the normal start finish that people are kind of not really paying attention too much. You've just had a long downhill, rides are fresh, and sometimes people get the jump on here rather than where we turn left at the end, a little downhill under the underpass. Everyone's very aware of attacks up that little ramp afterwards, and so it's unlikely that people get away. Now today, I'll get the steps on the screen just a reminder. I'll try to. God knows where they're going to be located. There we go. Give them a little shift down so you can actually see. Apologies about that. But as you can see, we start off with the Lutece Sprint, which is after you come through the start-finish banner, and so that's FTS. It's going to be an interesting one. You've seen that back-to-back races. It's a 30-minute gap between the two, or about, can't actually remember. I'll double-check for you later. But there's a bit of a gap. There is enough time for rest, maybe 20 minutes rest or so, so it can't be a 30-minute gap. So you see Marin from Food Raid pushing off the front here. As I mentioned, you know, it's a good opportunity to try and do it, but people have reacted. Alan, who we saw doing very well back when we were on Muckle I believe. It's a very strong rider, just jumping straight across to Marin. They've got a little gap over the group as they're going to send it on this little ramp up. It's just enough that the group does carry a bit of extra speed if they're pushing here, but without pushing they don't have much of an advantage. You see one of the down Dirty Ospreys just kicking hard to get to the front. Not quite sure who that was, but they haven't broken off the front yet. We still have those two riders off the front. A couple of riders keep pushing red numbers in the pack, but no one's making the jump across. You just see one of the beast mode riders just getting towards the front, just managing the pace. Not necessarily getting too worried about those riders 3 seconds up the road. They're definitely going to be wanting to keep an eye on it. It's 4 or 5 seconds can easily stay away on this course, especially on the uphill where riders are going to be saving themselves for that FTS segment. I think we'll see a slight lull through the start-finish banner, and then it really taking off on the ramps up. So as I was saying, it's going to be an interesting one of how people kind of choose to break up these two courses. I'll be very surprised if you see riders going all out in both. You know, they'll have riders kind of saving themselves for the first or the second, prioritising certain parts of it. As if you watched the live stream earlier, what our team did with the Dirty Sprocket Kings was to have our best TTers just focus solely on that. But, you know, they still might as well warm up on this course. And the one segment here that doesn't really make too much sense to go for is that first cross the line segment. The FTS, both laps, the first one, that's all there is. You might as well give it a shot. The second one is so close to the finish that if you don't push hard in the FTS segment, it's going to be very hard for you to get a good finish position. So you might as well go in on that, maybe not 100% for FTS, maybe starting more mid-pack than necessarily right at the back, as you sometimes see. So this gap's going up to 9 seconds now, so they're really going, and it's going to be very tough for the group to bring them back in. It's a nice move from the two of them. It might mean that they can save their legs a bit later, rather than having to push through really hard through all these sprint segments that we've got coming up. But we'll see how they manage to maintain it. See a couple of the ESRT riders moving their way to the front. Not necessarily their opposition, it's likely down Dirty Ospreys, when we saw in the standings that are possibly the ones who might want to make a move here. But yeah, as I was saying, it'll be interesting breaking it down and seeing, you know, which segments people target. And if you're just targeting the ITT later, the FAL segment makes much more sense to go for on this. It's not a huge effort. There aren't going to be the big sprinters really going hard for it. A couple might go in a little bit, but you're unlikely to get these huge monster efforts that we're about to see coming up on the FTS segment. And so it's kind of 3 points. And remember, the segments are only worth 10 points for first place, whereas the STS segments are worth 20. So it's a little benefit, it might help. And at worst, what it does is it blocks your opposition getting those points. So if you send your riders to focus on the FTS points, and another team just packs out that foul point segment, you can be in a bit of trouble. Probably not too much, but it can push you down. But whereas if you can have your ITT riders block it out, and it can be quite beneficial. See A. Olsen from ESRT Dinner really trying to close up this gap, possibly being utilised by his team just to bridge across. We've got it down to 4 seconds now, that gap, and it's not like these two aren't working hard, but the group is really sending as we come into the FTS segment. You can just see the blue warnings on the right hand side. It's a normal time when people start to kick and go, and you'll start to find riders towards the back of this group making full use of the draft as they push through it here. See, that's been quite a hard climb so far, so I'm not expecting to see any crazy numbers. See Christoph Thiem pushing through hard. Janssen there going Polmeyer. But it's going to be interesting who takes it off. Polmeyer's really sending it from Canyon. Really good for them. It's going to be a strong finish. It's ZH coming through first, but Polmeyer takes it 9.52. And one of the Burrito riders, Alan, in second. Then we have Alice from Beast Mode. Strong performance all around. John Verne, the usual people. Tommy Vale, very strong. CMC, they'll be very much appreciative of those points, especially with the TBR rider just behind them. Then we have a couple more riders. Daniel TM, Christoph TM, rounding out the top 10 for Beast Mode. So again, another strong showing from Beast Mode. But big points to the Coalition rider. And we saw those times around 9.5 seconds, so it wasn't particularly a fast sprint. But what it was a very fast uphill because of those two riders up the road. really making people work hard. And you can see by how stretched out this pack is. So we've got one of the Fuji rides off the back. There's big old gaps starting to appear, and impressed that everyone's held on so far, especially with how hard they're working. There was people pushing the pace at the front most of the way up that climb just to try and catch those breakaway riders. So we still have one rider up the road now. Looks like the Coalition rider. Oh, yep, Jacobs from Coalition. Thought it might be a continuation of the sprint there, but no, it's a clear mood from Jacobs. But he's not going to be let go by ESRT, who, chasing down both of them currently in joint second place. So very important that they see a move, they've got to go and fight for it. See Paul Meyer just sitting in there nicely, getting some recovery. It's really important on this downhill that people do recover, but you've got to be careful. It is cobble, so you're working a little bit harder for these speeds. See riders doing 8 there to bridge across, and very big move there from John Verma. So, it's not much to see. It's in the middle of the pack of sorts, but what it's done is created a split. It was very stretched out, and that split means all those riders behind are really having to work, and it's caught a lot of people out by surprise here. A couple of the CMC riders, a couple of the down dirty Ospreys, and all of them, look at them going 5, 6, 7 watts per kilo to try and chase back on here. Now they are going to make it on, but at what cost? And that all came because Verma had the kind of awareness that it was all strung out around him, and rather than just bridging across slowly as you see them doing here at 5, 6 watts per kilo, he kicked across really hard and opened up that gap. Very clever work there. And you see Owens there. We talked about this last week a bit. But if you just get to the front and just set a pace that's not too slow and manageable, it can really help your team out in a situation like that. That's exactly what we saw Brian Owens doing there. Got to the front 3.5 watts per kilo, whereas regularly they've been pushing 4. And it just means that gives his riders in that chase group a little more opportunity to get back on, rather than having someone setting the pace at the front at 4.5, 5 watts per kilo, as see Novak from Cone now doing. It means that no one really wants to overtake too much. It's more effective on climbs instead of flats. But it just meant the front group slowed down a little bit compared to this chase group here, and has allowed them to get back on. Or there will be. So we kick up here and see the Stag from the Ospreys, possibly a drop out there. Not quite sure, drop to absolutely 0. That'll be tough on them, especially if he might have been telling this. But we might see him possibly having decided, right, screw it, I'm just going for the ITT. I think as we come further on in this race, remember it is just a short one. We're only doing another half a lap or so of the course. So it is a short, punchy race, but riders as we go on might just kind of think, screw it, I'm just going to rest the legs now, because the pace has been very high throughout. See Brian Owens pushing hard there, trying to jump on the gap that Bousses from Fuji had made. He just jumped a little bit off the front group, and again, riders instantly reactioning. And this is what it's all about. Just testing the waters of your opposition, seeing if they're going to jump on your moves, and if you have riders who you can sacrifice on this course, then that's absolutely fantastic. Sending them off to just make a move, cause possibly some of the sprintier riders from the other team to have to chase down. And as we come into the last two, well, we are into the last 2 races of the series, it's exactly who you're up against, the 1 or 2 teams around, so you will find that people might let moves go from other teams, but if one of the teams they're fighting directly against makes a move, you're going to be jumping straight back on it. So coming up on this little underpass, not too far from the start-finish banner, which is the first across the line segment, so there's opportunity for a breakaway here. I'll be very surprised if anyone actually makes it, because everyone knows that's kind of what happens here. People give it a shot to see Nico Bouzez from Fuji just kicking 10 watts per kilo, but he's not really got far off the front, with Brink from ESRT doing similar, and just stretched out slightly, but everyone's aware of it happening there. Everyone knows, it's what commonly goes on, so they've been right on it. And just moving up accordingly. So we're now coming into a quick fire of 2 segments and then the finish. The base of the downhill and the normal start-finish banner, we have the first across the line segment. But I expect we won't see many of the big sprinters going for that. It'll be more some of the riders who aren't necessarily as typically strong. maybe ready to hold a breakaway, or planning that there'd be a breakaway and they could hold the wheel, but no such thing has happened. And then I think we're going to find it's going to be a very long finishing sprint, starting with the FTS segment and people just continuing on from there. See one of the ESRT riders going very long here. He's making that move early, going for those first cross the line points. See Bengston trying to react, but it's Broberg from ESRT making the move, and now we see the react coming. Daniel TM kicking hard, Bengston on his wheel. Bearer from Cone there as well. Tommy Vale, yet again from CMC, packing in some big points, and he might make it all the way across to Broberg here. It's a fantastic kick. It's a long way to the line. He might just have a few riders come through. He went slight too early. We see Polmeyer yet again coming through, and Bengston again. A double kick from him. Really well played. Then TM and Nordy coming through for 4th and 5th. I think Tommy Vale might have come through for 5th. Again, packed out by those coalition riders. Very strong performance. We haven't seen too much of them in the series, but they've been consistently picking up points, putting in fantastic effort. See Olsen here. Now this is a very clever move from him. He's come through very hard after that first cross the line section and just holding high watts here. You know, we've got the weird issue with the sidebar going on, but very impressive. Just working up to 8, jumping across the field while everyone's just sitting back up. So you can see how much of a gap he's got already over the field. You see Jacobs from Coalition instantly moving with him as they're both fighting for that 2nd place. So someone's got to go, and they've sent Jacobs to try and track him down. This way we start to hit the uphill segments, and it's a bit of an advantage having some draft, but I'm surprised to see Jacobs reeling this in quite so quickly, because Olsen's still putting in some serious numbers there to get across. And he's not really bringing any teammates with him. Like to see maybe Bengston or any of the other Polmeyer just on his wheel, taking advantage of his draft to get him across. See Bassett maybe using it slightly, but not quite any of them there. And so we're seeing a very different group here. Half going, well, less than half going all the way along to the finish, and then a lot more just sitting back, possibly going for FTS, just holding on. See Brian Owens there kicking hard, building up a bit of speed for the segment and really working it now. We'll be going for those FTS as well. See John Verma coming through hot from the group behind. And it's going to be very tight on the line again, big points. We won't actually see the results, but it looked like big points again for Coalition and the SRT. Didn't see any of the Beast Mode riders pushing through too hard there. Now we won't be able to see the actual start-finish banner on the map, but it is directly ahead on the apex of this hairpin bend of the roundabout around the Arc de Triomphe. I see Bengston already going here, trying to jump on wheels, sending up John Verma's with him as well. It's going to be a close call whether he gets too far off the front with the draft, but it looks like Verma's probably going to hold on. Verma's going to take it there for Bengston. It's Schweig from Rose Beastmode just behind. Olsen from ESRT. And Alice from Rose Beastmode. So real strong performance from Beast Mode yet again. ESRT taking probably the best pickings of the finish from the rest of the teams on that finish. But it'll be a tough close kind of standings between the two of them yet again on the overall points. With Coalition definitely having the better of the sprint segments and the SRT having the better of the finish. So just going to jump between the events and try and get some results on the screen for you. Might be a little while before they come through, so it's a very kind of quick jump between the two. We'll see if we can quickly catch hold of the 1.5 finish. I'm not quite sure I'm going to be able to. Just slightly frustrating. But we'll get it on the screen for you as soon as we can. So, looking at the live results now. See the live results from the race we just watched. The Platinum Plus division, and it's live standings, so results still haven't come through. ZwiftPower being as on it as ever. You can see some of the numbers that the riders are putting out. 4.8, 4.9, 5s. Some huge watt per kilo numbers and raw watts there. Maybe not quite the raw watts we've seen in other divisions, but those watt per kilos are huge, especially for such a kind of flat course with long downhills, plenty of time to recover. But the group was really sending it hard on all of them as we watched. And that's going to be hurting riders for the second race. And on the second race, we're going to go back and follow the Platinum 1.5. But we'll see if we can quickly jump over and cover the results of this Platinum Plus race as well. So we still haven't quite got anything through. Apologies for that. Just going to leave it for now. And we'll be back in about 10 minutes. We're going to leave the live stream running. We should have some results for you in about 5-10 minutes, and we're going to be starting the next race at 6:45, at least my time. I'll be in about 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Welcome back to those who have been watching throughout, or the probable one person who has. For those who aren't aware, I've just covered the Stage 5 ride for the Platinum Plus. Now I'm going to be covering the Stage 6 ride of the Dirt Racing Series for the Platinum 1.5 category. It's the final race of this series. It's going to be a very tight finish. We've got an ITT on the Zwift Gran Fondo course, but just for those who are watching earlier, we're just going to try and get some of those results on the screen for you, as well as the results from the last race for the race, from the last division for the race coming up. So the prime results aren't quite accurate, but you can just see a general kind of indication of who scored what. So you have Nordi and Christoph TM scoring well for Beast Mode, Lucas Schlitterman, seen as LS on the screen, and Daniel TM scoring highly as well. Again, probably another dominating race from Beast Mode. And then again, Coalition, we saw doing really well in the segments, and it's going to be close between them and the SRT. Moritz Pohlmeier taking first in 2 of the segments, and Bengtsen coming through quickly on a lot of them and getting second place overall. Overall at the finish, just take a look at the finish stand choice. We saw John Vermeer, ESRT, and Anders Olsen pushing through hard, just pipping Coalition riders respectively, and so they'll have a few extra points over Coalition at the finish, but it's going to come down to those 3rd and 4th riders for each of those teams to really make the difference in that overall standing, and they're both jointly fighting for the 2nd place. And we see Down and Dirty Ospreys doing very nicely. It'll be close between them and Cone V Sports, which is great to see them pushing on and competing. We'll take a look at the race we're about to cover. We saw a strong performance from HISP at the finish, but when we come back and have a quick look at the segments, have a look at the primes. And there we see Snowy Pruitt, Ali, and lots of the WoW riders. It's going to be Down and Beastly, and WoW dominating it again. Good from HISP. They'll be closing up there. Taking a look at the team standings. Voice going into the final race. So we saw Down and Beastly with a 3-point lead over WoW. Then BMC just behind, competing with Galaxy Platinum and L'Equipe Provence Platinum, all fighting for that 3rd place. And we have HISP a bit further down, but a good performance from them today, and they're definitely a team who are going to do very well in the ITT later. I think they lost out a little bit last week by having just 4 rides and a few having issues. And it looks like they may only have 3 today again, which is going to hurt them, but great to see them pushing hard and making it count as best they could. So jumping on to the course that we're going to be going on. So it's the ITT. You'll see a lovely stretched out profile as it's on the Grand Fondo course, but we're only doing the first section of it, finishing atop the Volcano KOM, just slightly after the banner, maybe 5 meters or so. So included on this, while it is an ITT with no draft, TTT bikes are going to be the recommended option. Importantly, we will have 2 segments as well. They're both fastest through. So we have a combination of points. We have the standard finish points that you can see on the right, which will just be for the first across the line finish points. But we also have STS points that you can score. Now this is where tactics could really come into play, with the first one being the reverse KOM, the Zwift KOM. I'm pretty sure it's the reverse direction, but it's just labelled as the Zwift KOM. So it's about a 4-minute effort, maybe a bit longer, not as a group. And then we'll have the Volcano KOM afterwards, which is going to be a much longer, gradual incline. The Zwift KOM starts off with a very steep section, and then it's kind of a continual effort. So it's a nice balance between being punchy, but also having to maintain those high 4-5 minute watt per kilo numbers after putting in a big punch. Whereas the Volcano is much more of a steady effort. There's a few little breaks in between, but it's much more of a standard, 5, 6, 7 minute test. I mean, it may spend it in 5 minutes, but it's that kind of more aerobic effort. So it's going to be an interesting balance. See how teams pace it. You might see a couple of teams sending riders to block on those steep segments, especially those who have scored highly in the sprints already today. They might just be conserving their legs on the start of this and then kicking hard. And one thing to note, we do have a 135% time limit on the race, so riders who finish 135% after the leaders, which is definitely possible on an ITT like this, won't score for their team. So it's very important those riders who might be just targeting those FTS segments, which in a small field could be very, very valuable. It's really important that they still come within a certain time, still push a little bit. So you can't just sit in and do nothing and then go for those segments. So jumping onto the stream now as we set off. Should be able to easily identify the kit. The Belgians, the WoW team, are in the yellow kit. And Down and Beastly are in the pink Merc kit. So looking at a shootout between the two of them for the win here. Especially bearing in mind what happened on the last stage, where it'll be very tight between the two at the top again. So leading out, you want to start pushing very hard out the blocks. Especially setting off on an ITT or any kind of time trial. It's important to kind of take advantage of those areas where you have a change in pace. Those areas of acceleration and deceleration, where you have, say, high speed at the bottom of the climb. The longer you can hold that high speed, or the longer you, well, the shorter you accelerate for, the bigger advantage you'll take. We also tend to see on courses like this, in the ITT form that we've had a few times before in this series, is that a few riders maybe go a little bit too hard at the start, just desperate to get to the front, and because you can see all those other riders on the road, rather than those certain ITT formats that you see on Zwift, where you start off as, say, minute intervals, 30-second, 20-second intervals. In this format, you can see every rider on the road. There's just no draft enabled. And so you see riders getting quite competitive with each other, and it's very easy to kind of lose track of your plan and just go a little bit too hard, too early, as you jostle and fight for places. So moving back to the front, we can see one of the equipped riders up the road. Then we've got Colin Rain and Chris for Down and Beastly, narrowly followed by one of the WoW riders, TB. Just holding their wheel. Now WoW are a team of generally a bit lighter riders, high WOP kilos, and this course should favour them quite a lot in that sense. But again, raw watts do have an advantage as they do in real life. It's not a huge advantage, not as significant as you'd find in real life, but it's still an advantage. And so it'll be interesting to see, especially with Dan Beastly being a bit of a heavier team, bit of a more powerful team. It's going to be interesting to see how they compare and where they take the time, as if they let it get to a straight shootout on that volcano uphill, they're going to struggle against the likes of WoW. Going back, see two of the HISP riders and two of the Galaxy riders. It's good to see the Galaxy riders pushing hard up here, and the HISP again. Oh, you see a couple of the riders, two of the Down and Beastly riders, Billy Z and Ali, not taking part, possibly just on there, cheering on their team, encouraging them, telling them to watch their pace and manage it carefully throughout the race. And that can make a big difference in a kind of effort like this. Now looking at the group, it looks like we have about 34, 35, 36 riders taking part. So those foul FTS points are important and could make a big difference. I think, remember, it's 20 points for first FTS, which will really start to add up. Especially if you're maybe at the bottom of that top 10 but are putting a real big effort on the segment. Or see with the likes of Van Erck, if he's got a bit of an advantage going into it, he might be able to just sit back, recover a little bit before and really send it on some of those segments. So then he's holding a solid 4.5 watts per kilo, which is really strong so early on in the race. Through one of the kind of more gentle segments in this race. As once you get out of this tunnel, it's very much a non-stop effort. We have the little kick out, then we're onto dirt, so slower speeds, which is essentially a 1-2-3% uphill speed equivalent, so you need to work hard on there. Then you're into the fishing village, where we have the boardwalks, and then straight into a 1-2% false flat incline, where again you want to maybe work a little bit harder, but only maybe 2-3 up to 5% more than your base pace on the flats, and then you're straight into the reverse KOM. So it's a very kind of punchy start to the course. We get a little bit of rest as we come around the volcano, but then again you're into the volcano climb, so it's not a huge amount of rest, and you do have the climb out of downtown Watopia. So it's a very non-stop course. I'd almost say, your base pace is going to be based on a 1-2% incline, and as a whole, because we do finish at the top of the volcano, the whole segment is generally an uphill. So you have to kind of base it on that. So maybe your base pace should be a 1%. So when we're on these flats, you want to be a bit below what you can manage. For the full 27, 28 minutes is probably going to take the lead riders. Looking back, we've got one of the WoW riders, TB, just moving through, dropping a few of the Down and Beastly riders. And it's kind of one of those places where you just want to stick to your plan, ignore what's going on around you, and just think, what am I aiming to do? What am I aiming to hold? So you have a little ramp up. Again, these 4-5% sections are some of the steepest bits in the course. The riders want to be getting up to about 5.5 watts per kilo up here. But you don't necessarily want to be doing too much more. Whereas you'd find in a race or a team time trial, when you have opportunity to rest, you can punch up a bit harder. On individual time trials, you want to keep quite a steady, flat pace. Maybe going up 10-15% on some climbs above your kind of base pace, which I keep talking about. It's kind of what you think you'd take. Say if it's going to be a 26-minute race, you take what you think you can hold for that period of time. And that's going to be your base pace, essentially, your kind of base output. And then for descents, you might drop it by 10%. For medium climbs, you might up it by 10% and work around that. But, you know, if you're in a race where you have time and opportunity to rest and take advantage of the draft, where the draft is more on a downhill and less on an uphill, that gets pushed to extremes, where it's maybe saving 30-50% on a downhill and working 20-30% harder on an uphill. Whereas you have to pace it a little bit more flatly on an ITT. And so you kind of work out what your base pace is and you just essentially just want to sit on it. Yes, you might be encouraged to push harder in a few segments, especially when we have these FTS segments, which makes it a bit more interesting, a bit more tactical, and especially when we just come off the back of another race. But it's all about how you work it around then, how you're playing the numbers. You'll have certain rides, they'll just have a sheet in front of them saying, you know, hold this number at this point, hold this number at this point. It just gives them that ability just to focus on the numbers, just drive it away. So you still have Rick Van Erck from the Quick Provence. Or then Wahoo Le Col Tag, possibly doubling up for them. Not quite sure what that is. Maybe he rides for one on the other. But doing very nicely at the front, just keeping a nice consistent pace, but he's just slowly being wheeled in by this group of four, as we can see behind two of the HISP riders, Remejo and Seve. So it looks like the HISP riders have split their kind of team, with some of them just doing the ITT and some of them just doing the points race. It's an interesting way. I'd probably recommend everyone doing both, especially as it looked like they were down to 3 riders for the points race, but then just having certain riders really target one or the other. As we look a bit further down the field, we've got a couple of down and beastly riders towards the front. Another HISP rider, so it could be a very big performance from HISP, and that's going to be interesting to see what plays out with Wow there and down and beastly for the first place in the Platinum 1.5 division, as Wow potentially could overtake Down and Beastly if they finish with a team in between them. So say Wow winning the stage, HISP in second, Down and Beastly in third. There's definitely something to watch out for, especially with HISP really doing well so far with 4 riders, I believe, maybe just 3 riders in that top 10 so far. Looks like 2 to me now, but maybe one had a dropout. Oh, there, no, it was just one even further up the road. So Seve, there's hushed all the way through. Van Erck's just slowed a little bit. But it was interesting to see, this is one of those segments. You've just come through the harder dirt section where, you know, it is 1%, but it's very consistent gradient, false flats, and the whole course, if you take it, you know, total gain versus total length, is probably averaging 1% or so. And so you'd think actually on a 1%, you probably want to be holding what you actually can. And so this isn't necessarily a rest area, but it's one where they shouldn't be kind of emptying the tank too much. Whereas you see certain riders like Remejo here pushing 6-7 watts per kilo, which is just silly. I'm not quite sure why you'd want to do that. It might be just a case, you know, of mentally wanting to get into that first, second place. But realistically, none of these riders should be doing above 5 on these 1% sections. If we have a look at the sign-up numbers, and we've got those 3 HISP riders, around 5.2 to 5 for 20. We've got Tomby from WoW at 5.0. Lagerman from Sisu, who we haven't quite seen much of. You can see him down maybe 10th at the moment, just behind one of the HISP riders, at 4.9 watts per kilo, and then everyone else is 4.7 or back. And so we shouldn't be seeing many riders holding 5 watts per kilo for a long period of time. It'll probably indicate that they're blowing themselves up a little bit early, or have had a lot left in the tank. See Tomby again from WoW just pushing hard, holding off from Remejo's just been on his wheel. But as we come through this segment, you want a section, let it secret be revealed. You want to see rides just slowing up a little bit. They've got this big segment ahead, and it's very tight at the moment. Say if you save maybe 5-10 seconds here of lose 5-10 seconds here of recovery, but gain it back on the climb, or even gain 5 seconds of it back on the climb, you'll get a lot more points for your money, especially when it could be very tight at the finish. In terms of finish points, just get on the screen. Well, we won't get on the screen for you. There we go. Just get the finish points on the screen for you. So you can see the difference between most places outside of the podium is just 1 point. And so if you sacrifice a place for getting, say, 10 FTS points, that's an absolute bargain. And a lot of riders should be thinking about that, considering it, especially those maybe in 10th place or so, where they might not be getting FTS points if they just continue at their pace. But if they slow up a little bit beforehand and then really send it on the segment, they might get some big points here. So as you come into this, you can see the curb on the right hand side signifying where it really starts to take off into the 8-9%. And this way we want to see riders pushing the 6-7 watts per kilo. I think 8 might be a little bit too much, especially for these lead riders who are going to be looking for a good overall time, try and take those podium spots. But for the other riders who are just maybe going for the segment, see Tiny Chris there, sending it really hard. Again, those riders just going for the segment, they can make a huge amount of time. You see how quickly he's flying past the rides around him, taking so much distance on the road. Because he's really setting, say, luge here, maybe keeping a more flatter pace, more even pace, and losing time. Maybe at the end he'll have a bit more energy, he'll take a couple of places back, but those segment points that Chris's might get here, if he can continue at this effort, are going to more than make up for any lost places because of this. So it's a nice, interesting battle between whether you're going ultimately just for those podium finish points, or you're going to save a bit, maybe sacrifice one of those podium places and take those FTS points. If you're outside those podium places and know you're not going to get there, 100% say ride should be really going for this segment. As when we come to the volcano, it's far less accessible. The top riders up the volcano are likely to be the top riders on the road anyway. You might have a few anomalies there, but in general it will be those, the top 15 riders are going to make up the entirety of those top 10 places at the volcano. So as you follow his rider here, he's still really sending it. His average so far must be absolutely phenomenal. Take a little look on it for you. So he's holding a 5 watt per kilo average, so is Romejo from his, and Tomby from Wow. So really impressive from them, but they're 12 minutes in, that's their 20-minute PB, and it's definitely going to be longer than a 20-minute race. So we'll see if they can maintain that. They're really sending it at the moment, though, putting in some big shifts. You see Chris has just slowed up a little bit. He has taken place. He's 7 seconds over Luge, one of his teammates, who he started actually behind. So he's made up some good time on the road, but he's just, I don't want to say hemorrhaging, but he's losing quite a bit of time here. Just struggling at 3.5 watts per kilo versus those around him. Back to the front, you see those riders still absolutely sending it. Be amazed to see what their 5-minute efforts turn out after this. So they've been sending it well above 5.5 the entire way through here. So perhaps they've got a bit more in the tank for a 20-minute effort over this course. You see that's a 10-second lead already for Sev from Hisp. Absolutely sensational, and just able to still push 7 watts per kilo up and over the segment finish line. I wouldn't be surprised to see his time up there with some of the riders we saw in the Platinum Plus division earlier. See, probably around 4, maybe even sub 4 minutes. Yep, 3:47. Absolutely incredible time there. See a little fight here between TB from Wow and Romejo from Hisp. But it'll be important to see where they started the segment relative to each other as opposed to where they finished. See, all very tight. So they must have narrowly crossed the line together. And Romejo just manages to take it. So that's 2 extra points for him. Now you see Gibbon from Galaxy coming through. I expect some of those times will start to fall as you have other riders coming through that segment. John Paul really hitting it. Chris still pushing hard. Need to see where he ends up coming through at. He comes through in 6th there just after John Paul, down and Beasley, so good points for them. Doing a bit better so far than Wow. Just have TB up there. Colin Rame there currently taking that 10th FTS spot, which is a good 5 points, but there we go. And the WoW ride is starting to come in here. I'm not sure who it is in 6th, putting in a big time for WoW. Knocking people back up the Galaxy riders, Alexis and Gibbon, pushing riders further down. But that's where I see it really starting to count. Those riders who have just kind of slowed up a bit early or taken easy to begin with and then really sent on the segment, getting big points for their team. As you can see on the mini-map, it's really spread out here. Loads of gaps between rides, no real kind of solid groups forming. See a little bit here around likes of John Poole and Chris from Dan Beastly, Morris from Cryogen just behind. Generally it's all very spread out now with no draft, so there's no real reason for it to clump together. We tend to see riders just mentally just sticking close to anyone in front, just using them as a kind of push, just keep going, keep pedaling. No matter how much their brain's telling them just to stop, take a few seconds to recover. And that's where it really hurts riders. So when you drop down to, say, 1 watt per kilo for a few seconds on 90T, it really will impact you. Whereas normally you can get away with it in a race. You can just drift slightly through the pack, get a few seconds recovery in. So we've got about 2 and a bit kilometers to go before we start the climb. And again, we've got important segment just pushing out downtown here. Lots of riders won't go hard enough up here, and some might go a bit too hard. See all these riders at the front really using that section to recover, which is good to see. They pushed very hard on the segment, as they needed to get the points, and they're just sitting in and recovering through there, well below the 5 watts per kilo they've been averaging so far. After you've come up the climb, see these groups really are starting to form on the road now. Again, people just like to sit around someone, and while they may be able to push on, they're probably going to save themselves just for the volcano. As the individual places don't matter anywhere near as much as the segment points will do outside of those podium spots and every 10 places, where you have a drop off of 5 points. So it's really important just to save your legs if you can and send it up the volcano. And this section's the perfect opportunity to do that. As soon as you've got over this lump out of downtown, it's generally all flat until the volcano. You have a little downhill to get in and a little climb after we come out the centre of the volcano for a few seconds. But that's about it. So you want to see riders significantly below. Try not to cost themselves too much position, but at the likes of maybe 3.5 watts per kilo, 4 watts per kilo. See Raim here for Down Beast doing exactly that. Just conserving the legs a little bit, still working hard. He's got quite a bit of a gap behind him and chasing down Van Eyck from L'Equipe Provence up ahead. So I expect once he gets onto that wheel, he might just sit in. It's a big gap to those riders up the road ahead of him, especially the likes of the HISP riders, who have a monstrous lead over the rest of the field, along with TB from WoW. It's surprising to see those. Not more WoW riders up here. I was expecting to see the likes of Van Cutsum, Killian Van den Abeel, all there towards the front, fighting hard. Not sure if Abeel's not necessarily riding in there. I think that was him, K. WoW here. Possibly might just be targeting the segments. Oh, no, it isn't him. He's back here. Or possibly just knackered after the last race. You know, see him so far back. He's a very strong rider and would have been one of my favourites, without looking necessarily at the numbers, going into this stage. On the downside, perhaps he's a very light rider at 51 kilos. And so while he does have good watt per kilo numbers and very good 5-minute numbers for a Cat B, and for a Platinum 1.5 rider, but the kind of lack of pure watts might be a little harmful on this course. Though again, CDA does come into it a lot. As you can see, the likes of Rick Van Eyck doing very well. So on the heavy riders, I think it's averaging almost 400 watts so far. See if you can see what he's putting out at the moment. He's putting a solid shift so far. It's just coming out of the volcano, so the first rise is just starting to get to the base of the volcano KOM. Just take a little look at the gaps. But I suspect it's going to be a strong win here for the HISP riders. It'll be interesting to see who takes that second place. That's a good 5-point swing for second place. So very important for WoW, with a lot of down and beastly riders in that top 10, 15 riders. See a nice little bunch of them hovering back here, down in 10th, 11th and 12th place. Possibly just saving the legs a bit, like we see with Lagerman, Sisu. It's really, a lot of the points going to come down to this segment here. And if riders can make big gains, it's a good opportunity to make 30, 40 seconds up on riders around you. And so I'd be surprised to see it happening towards the front. But maybe we might see some of these WoW riders really sending us. They seem to have been very conservative so far compared to what they are capable of. But it's one thing to be theoretically capable of it, another to actually put it down on the day. Coming at the start of the segment, see riders starting to raise it up and revealing what they're kind of going to be capable of for this climb. So I think I find it very telling when you cross that line, just seeing what riders do, as there aren't many riders who'll cross the line and push only 4 watts per kilo. If they're going to be able to do 5 up the rest of it. If they're only pushing 4 at the start, then they're probably going to struggle to do that for the rest of the way. Exactly what we see. So the first start of this, while it is a kind of general climb up, see lots of riders encouraging each other in the chat. It's a bit of a bumpy one with a few uphills, flatter sections and a couple of downhills. So it's really important to it's actually some of the steepest part of the climb. A lot of this climb is only 3-4%. I mean, some of it's even flat. But this first section is very steep and it's some of the hardest where riders really want to make time. The other part is the very end of the finish line. You can make a good 5-10 seconds up on certain riders on that final 200 meters or so, because it's up to 10% or so. So if you can sprint up that versus other riders doing 4 watts per kilo, you can absolutely fly by them. See our Dave here from Galaxy really sending it up, really impressive to see. Up into the mid-5s, 5 watts per kilo. And you can see how quickly he gained over there on Chris. He just seems to be struggling a little bit. He went out quite hard early on. I think he might be paying the price slightly. Still holding big numbers, which is really impressive to see, but as a heavier rider, it's in his benefit if he can keep it a bit more evenly paced. And he really centred on that FTS segment, especially early on, pushing into the 7s and 8s on that first climb, and it seems to have done a bit of damage to him. Then he's responded again though, so you come to this little flatter section. And one thing to kind of do when you're going through a climb like this that's so undulating in the sense that there are specific segments that are uphills, flats. It's all about, if you look on the minimap, just getting to the next point, The tunnel's a really big mark on the volcano. 300 meters or so of flat ground where you can just recover a little bit before you reset and go into the last 3-4 minutes of the climb. See that gap staying very similar, maybe increasing by about 5-7 seconds. To Sever up front, he will definitely be coming through to take the win short of a disaster. It's going to be very tight here though. These two riders have stuck together the entire way since that KOM with Romejo and TB for WoW fighting it out. I suspect that could very well come down to a sprint finish in the last 500 meters or so, as neither of them's kind of giving anything to the other. Every time we see one of them pushing 6-7, the other reacts. And you know, they're almost treating it like a scratch race where they can draft each other. But there's no draft enabled. It's just responding to others' move, not letting them get ahead of them too far. Alternatively, trying to do the same and break the other one mentally. See Romejo there pushing 8 watts per kilo, just again, closing up that gap, getting past, and then just slowing down. I'm not quite sure TV there dropping down. Both of them are definitely burning matches here. I'll be amazed if they can continue at this pace the rest of the way. I see them just dropping down every so often. Suspect both of them have worked very hard and possibly a bit too hard early on in this climb. They'll probably keep the gap ahead of McGibbon behind, but it's definitely not riding the most efficient way. And realistically, if one of them had just kind of held their set pace that they could manage, they'd probably be much further up the road later on than they're going to end up being. CTV there really trying to push hard, get a bit of a gap open, but again, Remejo into the red numbers again, responding. It's a fantastic battle between the two of them. Jump back when they get into the final stretch. And back down the road, see Van Eyck there just struggling a little bit. A few riders have got past him. McGibbon from Galaxy, Rame from Down and Beastly, just taking their way through. And as a heavier rider versus the light riders, it's exactly what you'd expect to see. Lagerman as well, just moving his way on up. And Van Eyck did very well, just taking the advantage while he could, while it worked in his favour. But he's arguably suffering for it now, though he doesn't look like someone who looks like he has paced this absolutely perfectly. But there's not much you can do versus riders who can hold another 0.5, 0.4 watts per kilo over you over a 7-minute climb. And further back, looks like some of those Down and Beast riders just been slipping a little bit. Haven't had any of their kind of direct opposition. The WoW riders gaining places on them, but they're certainly gaining kind of distance and numbers on the road versus them. You see Van Cutsum and Bowens from WoW both taking a few places, getting very close, 15 seconds back from those Down and Beast riders. It's going to be very tight at the top, especially if they can get past, with Hisp looking very likely. They've got 4 riders entered to take that first place. So it looks like Remejo here has broken TB. It's coming to the last few 100 meters. And you can see that gap has really opened up. That stone on the right hand side is really the marker of that final finishing sprint where it gets to the real high percentage. Remejo just dropping a little bit, but that 5-second gap is unlikely to be assailable unless TB has a huge sprint effort left in the tank here. You want to be getting to the red numbers here if he was to close it, but Remejo's instantly just pushing 7 watts per kilo. And I suspect that will be that. A fantastic effort from the two of them, and real big credit to Hisp taking 1 and 2 on this course. Really impressive performance from the two of them. Just going back down the road, we've got Colleen coming through, and it looks like Van Eyck, yep, Lagerman has come past Van Eyck there. He's not quite doing as much now, but he's taking that 5-second gap or so. And it's very hard when you see a rider come through to kind of react and push all the way back through them. But Van Eyck definitely will have some kind of sprint effort here, where they can just carry a bit more speed. One of the problems with this climb finish is that the heavier riders, again, have the less advantage, where they can't change speed as quickly as the light riders. So when they hit this, on certain courses, when you hit an uphill finish, they have the advantage where they can hold the momentum, but when you're trying to gain speed, this is very much in the light rider's advantage. But you can see the difference is made here. On the uphill, that gap's come down very quickly just by a small difference in speed, but sadly it's not going to be enough. And Lagerman's going to come through and take 6th place there with Van Eyck in 7th. Morris coming through in 8th. As we look further back, it looks like Luge and Chris lost a couple more places there. It'll be disappointing for them, but there's a chance to make it back. See Dave from Galaxy getting caught down by the two of them, both of them pushing 7 watts per kilo. It's going to be very tight, but you can see the advantage of that 10%. If they can keep these numbers up, they're going to come through, take places. Between the two of them, it'll be tight as well. See, again, so much time can be taken by just kicking on that last section. People underestimate that 2-second gap there to Dave, who was ahead of them by 2 seconds before it. Really impressive finish from the two of them. See Bounds though from WoW taking places again, and the same from Van Cutsum. We're going to see if they can break into that top 10 FTS. We'll see on the right hand side, left hand side of the screen even. See where they end up finish. It looks like they're not quite showing up. So you see Bounds there in 7th. So that's some good FTS points, and that's going to be harmful for Down and Beastly's effort. Van Cutsum a bit further down. But that's going to be interesting, because those FTS points are really going to count in those final standings, especially with those Down and Beastly riders not taking any of those podium spots. Those FTS points are going to possibly decide the difference between the two teams. see a couple more riders coming through. Galaxy again had a good showing today, but it's fallen off a little bit towards the end. They got out very hard, but just not quite managed to hold on to it. They're currently fighting for that 4th spot, possibly even for the podium against BMC, the Cryogen team. Very good performance from them. Same with Hisp. Hisp were down in 6th place going into this, and I'll be amazed if they haven't won this stage. And so that could very well move them up into 5th place, 4th, if Galaxy didn't have a great outing. I expect Galaxy will hold on to this. Depends how they did in the earlier race, though. We saw Hisp had done very well, so with the 2 races back-to-back, there's opportunities for huge swings in the league standings. Just a nice kind of way to end it. You know, obviously it's important to perform every single week, but it's good to have the opportunity to change things by having a big showing on that last day. It's not all set in stone. Every race matters and every place matters all the way to the finish of the league. See a little battle here between Kilian van den Biel and Terrahelm from the Quick Provence. So it looks like we'll have all the riders within the time limit, which is always great to see. Unless there's some really far back that haven't quite shown up yet. See them both fighting out. They've just got maybe 700 metres, 800 metres or so to go. This is the kind of moment you've just got a little flat section coming up where you want to break the opposition. Depending on what your ability, if you've got a great sprint, then maybe just sit level with them, hold on, and just kick through at the end. But if you maybe aren't a strong sprinter, just really, you want to break them early. As soon as we hit the incline here on these lava kind of plumes on the right hand side, just want to absolutely send it, just break them early, don't give them the opportunity. So we see that the Quick Rider pacing it a bit better through that section. But again, Van den Biel having a bit more in the tank, numbers wise, able just to come through. See a reaction here, just to hold on to the wheel, keeping it tight. Just have a quick look up the road as we have the little 2 more riders coming through. Again, there we go. Terrahelm pushing very hard again. Van den Biel reacting. As soon as he gets ahead, he's reacting instantly. And here we go into the final 50 metres or so. It's all about just a sprint to the line here. You've got to do it early. Pushing through hard, and Van den Biel just there. Red numbers making a big difference there. And he's going to fly away there to take the place. That's one of those things, you know a ride around you has that big kick. You've got to break them early. We didn't quite see that. But again, fantastic performance from them. Really impressive. Just having a quick look at the live standings for you. See if we can get the results on the stream. Possibly see some of the other races going on the course in the other divisions. But there are the results for the A race, which is the A race, the Platinum Plus race. We see Beast Mode again doing fantastically. Paul Hamblett from Hula Cole, not quite sure which team he's actually riding for, taking the 3rd place. Then Arnie Jacob from Coalition ESRT up there again. Bengtson yet again is absolutely fantastic rider, doing really well for Coalition, keeping them tight in that battle with ESRT, so it's going to be really close between the 2 of them. It's been touch and go throughout the entire season, and it's going to be that way yet again in the final standings for who can take 2nd. But big credit must go to Beast Mode, who have been dominant throughout the series, and it's great to see them doing so. So looking into the race we just watched, we saw Hisp doing fantastically, taking the first 2. Oh, we'll just let's go back on the A just to sort it, so you can actually see it by time, although pretty identical in terms of the primes as well as slight changes. But those aren't the final primes results, they're not quite set up properly here, but they'll give you a rough insight into who's been doing what and where riders are. Just take a it's going to take a quick look, but it looks like the rides have finished. See if there's any other races we can just watch while we wait for those results to load up. looks like everyone is very thankfully heading downhill now at the end of that. We're just jumping on to the E race, which I believe will be the gold 2? No, gold 1 race, perhaps. See if no. But yeah, the results can be up on the screen now for you. That's just get them a quick refresh. We should have the full B results, or not. Thank you very much, ZwiftPower. There we go, there's the standings in terms of the finishing over the line on the ITT for what is the Platinum 1.5 race. So as you can see, Down and Beastly having 4 riders in that top 10, 15 or so, which is very good. Going to be lots of finish points for them, but importantly, Wow having 3 around there, including a podium, which is a good points advantage. And then they pushed very hard on the segments, and that could very well come into it. It's going to be very tight between the two teams, especially with HISP having such a strong performance. But yet again, importantly, HISP look to have only had 3 riders in the stage. And so while they've got a huge amount of points finishing first and second, it's going to hurt them in terms of their actual points. They might not come between the two teams, so I would take a punt that Dan and Beastly have won the title for the Platinum 1.5 EMEA C division. So congratulations to them. They have congratulations to WoW, if not for pushing them very close or for possibly winning it. It's great to see the competition all the way down the field though, with a huge variety of teams doing very strong on what is a very tough stage at the back of another hard effort in France. So thank you very much for joining me, and I hope you're all looking forward to Season 5, possibly coming sometime around August. It'd be great to have you for a series that's based around more interesting categories that provide better racing, more tactical racing, and certainly a more team-based effort where riders of all abilities can contribute. And that's been such a fantastic thing to see this season. And you know, big shout out to all the organisers of the series. It's a huge effort, and the fact they've taken the feedback on board from everyone in the decision about what categories, even asking about the races, it makes a huge difference. So thank you very much to them. Makes a big difference. We've seen riders who maybe don't have anything above a 10 watt per kilo sprint winning races this series, which is very unusual on Zwift. So many Zwift races end up with a traditional sprint finish, or the heavier riders dominating the team time trials. And this, having the new categories, has really opened it up. It's not perfect. There are still people too high, too low, but it's infinitely better. I'd almost guess that maybe 95% of the riders are in the right place and able to be competitive in one of the races at least throughout this series, and that's all that we can kind of really ask for. We're not going to be competitive every race. Certain riders will suit certain races more than others, but the fact that there is an opportunity to perform well, do well for your team and contribute makes a big difference, rather than perpetually coming there in 20th, 30th, 40th place every single race and not scoring prime points. So big shout out and thanks, especially Tim Hansen as well, creator of the Zwift racing app rankings. It's made a really big difference. So hopefully you guys have also felt the same when you've been racing, enjoyed these live streams. So let me know if you have, let me know, and let the organiser know if you have any feedback. They're very open to it. And thank you very much for joining. We'll see you in a couple of months for Series 5.